available too. If you just want to take. I want to introduce Sasha Huven, who was here last fall for one of our programs too, and she's going to talk about prolific plant propagation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha. I am a volunteer with the Montgomery County Master Gardener program here. And I run the Blacksburg Seed Library here at the library as my project. And as part of that, I do talks here at the library about various topics that are season appropriate. So right now, I want to talk to you about prolific plant propagation. How to multiply your garden. So the agenda for today is methods of propagation, just general propagation methods. We're going to talk about not necessarily season appropriate, but then I want to jump into some spring propagation methods that you can do in your own yards. I want to talk to you about general spring care while you're propagating this spring, things that you can do around your garden to help your garden out, and then upcoming propagation events if you feel inspired to do more propagating. All right, general methods of propagation. Oh, there we go. So I want to talk about layering, cuttings, and division. A lot of the programs I run here as part of the seed library are focused on seeds, starting from seed and harvesting seed. So I wanted to do something a little bit different today and talk about asexual propagation, which is not from seed. So plants created via asexual propagation methods, like the ones we're going to talk about today, are genetically identical to the parent plant. We call it a clone. And so they're genetically identical, which can be positive and negative. Cuttings, layering, and division are all methods of propagation that can take place at various times throughout the year. So first I want to talk about cuttings. Woody and herbaceous plants are both often propagated by cuttings. It's probably one of the most popular way to propagate plants. From houseplants and herbs to shrubs and trees, this method can produce healthy clone plants of the parent. Depending on the plant species, the cuttings should be taken at different times of year. So there are some plants that will need to be cut in spring. Some can handle any time of year, some fall, winter. So that all depends on the plant species. For woody plant cuttings, this method should be performed in winter time because the plant is dormant and then you're not exposing that plant to pests. So you want to do it when it's dormant and it's cold outside. For herbaceous plant cuttings, this method is best carried out in spring. So I'll be talking a little bit about this later. There are many different kinds of cutting techniques utilizing different parts of the plant. So there are stem cuttings, leaf cuttings, root cuttings, and so all of those ways to cut and propagate a plant just use the different plant parts. So within those techniques, there's also several methods of each technique. So while you're taking a stem cutting, you can take a tip cutting, a medial cutting, a cane cutting, a single eye cutting, a double eye cutting, and a heel cutting. Those are all different cutting techniques to use just with this propagation method. So when you're propagating via cutting, it's best to take newer growth. It will more readily produce roots and more readily succeed. Cuttings can be placed in water or soil. I thought I brought my propagation station, but it must be in the car still. I have a little propagation station that I hang on my windowsill, and it's a bunch of test tubes in this little holder, and I love it for rosemary. I take a lot of rosemary cuttings. So yeah, anything that you can have. I usually do them in water, but I will say sometimes in water, rooted cuttings can be more susceptible to hardening off or problems during hardening off. So it's best to root them in soil if you can, but that might take some special equipment like lights and frequent watering, or like a greenhouse setup. So it can be a little bit more difficult. Next, I want to talk about layering. Stems of some plants may root while placed in soil, producing a clone plant after being separated from the parent plant. So there are also several different techniques to do this layering method. You can do tip layering, which is really popular for caneberries like blackberries and raspberries. You can put one of those new canes, the shoot, into the ground and kind of bend it back up underground. So you're burying it like 3 to 4 inches, but making sure that shoot is pointed back upwards. And if you bend it a little, that will encourage root growth from those caneberries. There's simple layering, which a stem is buried or partially buried in the ground. So like for this pothos plant, you can see that there's some aerial roots on here already, but if you were to bury parts of this stem right here, each of these sections outside of the soil would make its own plant. We'll revisit this pothos too when we talk about some other things too later. Compound layering is very similar to simple layering. It's just instead of taking several sections of this plant and burying them, you just take one for simple, and you can do multiple for the compound layering. There's also air layering, which is for woody branches and like trees and shrubs can be air layered. So basically you're removing that outer layer of bark and you're surrounding it with usually like a peat moss or something else that can hold moisture, and it will root if you cut off that outer bark layer. It's just another form of layering. A bonus to layering is it can reduce stress versus like the cutting method, because while that new plant is developing, it's still getting water and nutrients, sugars from the parent plant. So it can reduce potential problems like what you can possibly have with cutting. Propagation via division. Division works for many types of plants, and it's very simple. It's a very simple and easy way to propagate plants. It's taking one plant and making them into many other plants. It's also considered a modified layering technique. So 2 things I want to talk about here are stolons and offsets. So here on the spider plant, this would be a stolon. This growth habit here, and you can see it's already made the baby plant. So if I were to put this on it, are you able to hold it kind of in front of the? There we go. So if I were to take this plant and put it directly into rooting medium, it would grow and it would still get supplemental nutrients and water from the parent plant still, which can also reduce problems with versus simply just cutting.
You need to kind of show it to the.
Oh, there we go. We'll show this in people.
Sorry.
Thank you. And then for offsets, here you can see that I had an original plant here, and all of these offsets are rooted. So it's still, this is a Hilea. Yes. So I had the original mother plant die, but all of these offsets came off and they're all rooted. So as it was still attached to the mother plant, they've received that supplemental nutrients and water. Just kind of an added bonus versus just cutting. Oh, no worries. right. Now that we've covered just some general propagation methods, I wanted to talk about what you can specifically do in spring. So we're going to talk about bulb separation, simple perennial division, perennial root cuttings, rhizome renewal, and shrub suckers. These are all things that you can do in springtime. And I'll talk about some plants that you can do with each kind. As I said before, each plant has very specific propagation needs. So like what time of the year. So these are all spring appropriate. So starting with bulb separation, as you can see outside, we've got a lot of early spring blooms happening right now. What I like about the blooms is these are what a lot of our pollinators rely on as they've overwintered and they wake up and they're hungry. So I like to keep an eye out for flowering bulbs and know that we can propagate them and make more food for our pollinators. Popular spring blooming bulbs and corms include some that I have here. Tulips, which are not pictured, the daffodils on the right, the hyacinths in the middle, and the crocus on the left. So these are all popular spring blooming plants that you can do bulb separation with and have more. Why separate your bulbs? You can create more plants by separating your bulbs. Obviously, we're talking about proliferation. But when you get all those crowded bulbs in one spot, they're likely to stop flowering. So if you'd like to continue that flowering habit, it's definitely recommended to separate those bulbs.
How early?
How early? I've got your answer right here. So after the foliage has withered, so I brought some samples over here. Oh goodness. I'm so sorry. Did I close out? Yes. I'm gonna have to reopen that PowerPoint. Hang on for a second. I'm so sorry.
Same problems. Everybody. Yes.
Okay. That's a great question. I think I just clicked out when I went to turn it around. Ah, here we go. From current slideshow. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you for your patience.
We have your notes.
Oh no.
If you stop share, you go back. This is the tricky thing when you're doing a hybrid.
Yeah.
So if you just go to the share.
Share.
Yeah, right here. And yeah, pick that one.
This one?
Yes. Yes, so you have your notes
Okay.
and we don't.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you for your patience. I brought some samples here. So you can see the foliage is kind of withered, so I dug these up from my own backyard. And when I dug them out, like all three of these bulbs were super close together. So if they would stay like that, they would eventually stop blooming. So that's the first little one I'm going to show you. This is another sample that I took a picture of in my own yard. As you can see, the entire middle section stopped blooming because it's so overcrowded. So those really also need to be separated. So after the foliage has withered, you want to remove the bulb from the ground. Be careful with the bulbs. If you put your shovel through it, obviously you're not going to have a bulb anymore. So use a shovel or a pitchfork and loosen the dirt around it first. Brush off the soil as you can, and then you want to just separate them out. They should come apart pretty easily, both bulbs and corms. You should just be able to pull them right apart. So when you replant, you'll want to replant immediately. If you have well-draining soil, you can replant them where there's well-draining soil. If you don't have well-draining soil, you're going to want to dig a trench. And in the bottom of that trench where you're placing your separated bulbs, you're going to want at least 1/2 to 1 inch of sand underneath to help with drainage. And so how and where you plant also depends on the size of the bulbs or the cormels that you're bulblets, or cormels that you're taking off of that parent bulb. If they're pretty decent size, you can go ahead and plant them about twice their height and depth. So if you have a 2-inch bulb, you're going to want to place that like 4 to 6 inches below the soil. And you can place that in its final resting spot. If you have smaller bulbs, it may take several years to produce a bloom or to get to like a mature enough state to make a bloom. So you're going to want to put those somewhere where foliage is not required, in like a maturation area in your garden. The only thing I will say about the small bulblets also is you also have to protect them from frost. So a leaf mulch or leaf covering would be a great way to do that, or like regular mulch, as long as they're protected from that frost, especially with the small ones being so shallow. The small ones are only 2 or less inches in the ground. So if you're working with poor draining soils, you want that 1/2 to 1 inch of sand on the bottom, and then another inch on top of that too, making sure that those don't rot in the ground.
It sounds like you're talking about doing this close to fall.
So this spring bulb separation can be done like as soon as the foliage is withered. So a lot of my daffodils are already withered, like these ones. So there are a lot of bulbs that are required to be separated in fall. Like the Virginia bluebells, I know need to be separated in fall. But for daffodils, you can start separating as soon as the foliage dies.
Why tulips only seem to blossom 1 or 2 years versus daffodils seem to blossom several years before you have a transplant.
And can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So the question was, can I explain why tulips only bloom for 1 or 2 years versus daffodils that will bloom several years? I cannot answer that question. I don't know the answer, but I can reach out to master gardeners, and if you want to like exchange emails, we can definitely try to find an answer for you. Any other questions about bulbs? So some people store. Yeah, so that's, oh, sorry, I'm repeating the question. Are there some bulbs that need to be dug out every single fall? So some bulbs, I feel like that's often gardener preference because I know people that do it both ways. If you can protect your ground enough, and store them appropriately in the ground, that's really what they're after. Making sure that they're not damaged by frost, and sometimes the amount of work that they want to put into, because it's a lot of work to dig out and every year. So oftentimes it's personal preference and it can be done both ways. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about simple perennial division. So this methodology depends on the age of your perennial. All perennials should be divided about every 3 years to stay productive and healthy. Dividing perennials encourages new growth, flowering, and prevents overcrowding. Older perennials that are 3+ years, you want to remove from the ground and brush off as much soil as you can. I would honestly maybe wipe or clean the soil away too with water. So you want to take that clump after it's removed and you want to stick some forks into the middle and separate it with those forks. Pulling apart like that doesn't overly damage the roots versus just like cutting it straight down. The forks pulling apart kind of keeps more of those roots intact. And then you're going to want to split large clumps into 4 sections. So just do the fork method twice. Larger specimens, if you're working with a really big clump, can be placed directly where they're going to be flowering, their permanent resting place, while smaller specimens may need a maturation area to reach blooming. And I wanted to, I'll talk about young perennials. Young perennials under like 1 to 2 years old, you can just gently pull apart their root mass. You don't need the forks because they're not super entangled yet. Just aim to have 3 shoots per section. So this is another little piece of show and tell that I wrote here. So this is one of my younger perennials that I dug out of my yard. Unfortunately, it was ravaged by woodchucks last year, so I didn't get any blooms on it. But I have really healthy foliage, and it's only 1 year old. But you can see that the root mass isn't really like too big or hardy. So I can just break off chunks of this plant by just like pulling it apart. So like this is what I've placed, and this has way more than 3 blooms on it. So this I could place in its final resting spot, and it would bloom likely, pending no woodchucks.
What is that?
This should be Coreopsis. I have a whole native garden at home, so I'm pretty sure this one is Coreopsis. And if anyone wants some old bar plants, please come and get them. That's my second piece of show and tell. I forgot to mention I have these bulbs too. So I dug out these from my yard and I wanted to show you kind of what you're looking for here. So here I dug out some tulips that I had in my yard, and you can see all these like little tiny bulblets forming. So this is really like what you're after when you're dividing your bulbs. So these ones are really, really small. You're going to want to place not even 2 inches below the soil, but just to have a better idea of what you're looking for when you're digging up your bulbs. And there's a lot of little ones in here.
What is that?
What
is that plant?
tulips?
Question about that.
Yes.
So like those tiny ones?
Yeah.
Thinking that, when would you expect to see like foliage and when would you expect to see flowers? Like the next year, 20 years?
For something that small, I would say at least several years, minimum like 3, they say. So yeah, and that's why I talked about like a maturation area, because if you're planting something and it's in its spot and you're expecting that foliage, or for aesthetic purposes, you need that there, it's definitely not the place for it. But give it a couple of years and okay. So I really like to emphasize perennials in my talks too. So I wanted to talk about 3 different natives here that division is not recommended for. Division is not recommended for perennials with a taproot. So these 3 native plants right here, the Bactesia on the left, the butterfly weed in the middle, and the rattlesnake master on the right, those all have a taproot root habit. So those are not recommended to divide via division like this. All right, root propagation is another one, another form of spring propagation that you can do at this time of year. They're a great way to propagate many fleshy rooted perennials. So if you dig up your perennials and they have large root sections, like a ½ an inch in diameter or greater, you can take cuttings of that root section. You want that root section to be like 2 to 3 inches, and you want it slanted on the bottom. Directionality does matter. So when you're planting these, you have to make sure that the way the root was growing before is the way that you have it planted in your pot. So 2 to 3 inches with the slanted bottom, and then you want to cover that with about 1/4 inch of soil on the top there. And then for smaller root portions, which is, you know, 1/4 of an inch or less, you can take root cuttings of, and you want to place them horizontally in a flat. So a lot of like this method is great if you have that extra equipment like a greenhouse space or growing lights, but not necessarily the most accessible. But also, you need to keep them watered very frequently if you're growing this way. Rhizome renewal. So popular rhizomatic plants around here would be bearded iris and Solomon seal. So to renew your rhizomes, you want to dig up the root and wash the soil away. Make sure that you leave those smaller roots intact. And so the old rhizome will have new growth off of it, and it should be pretty obvious which part is new growth, and it should snap right off these. The new rhizome should snap right off of the old rhizome. If it doesn't, you can always cut it flush with the old rhizome. And then you want to remove any old decaying growth from the rhizome, the newly cut rhizome, and then cut right below some of the new roots and replant immediately. With a lot of rhizomatic plants, a lot of them like their root to be exposed because putting it too deep in the soil will cause it to rot. So oftentimes you want to expose that upper part of the iris rhizome. All right, so suckers is the last one I kind of wanted to talk about here. This one, these specific shrubs can be propagated in spring. Mock orange, spirea, and sumac can all be propagated via the root suckers in spring. So the root suckers are the little plants that you see coming up around the roots. So what you want to do is gently remove the dirt around the sucker to see if it's developed its own roots. If it has, you're good to trace those roots back to the original root and cut it off from there. And you can plant it right in a permanent site if it's developed its own roots already. If the root development isn't great, you can put it in a pot and keep it in a cold frame and have a more hardy plant for next year. Just some tips to go over with spring propagation before I talk about garden care. You're going to want to water new divided plants frequently to reduce transplant shock. Working on cloudy and overcast days in the garden while you're doing division can also keep your plants from excess sun stress. Any propagation technique needs to be executed in its recommended time of year. So every single plant has its own propagation method that will work for it and the time of year that it needs to be done. Doing these techniques outside of that specific time frame will cause damage to your plants and potentially death. Use clean tools. This is a big one if you're pruning or removing dead or diseased material. You're going to want to clean your tools between cuts. Make sure that you spray with isopropyl alcohol, wipe down your tools, make sure you're not spreading disease from plant to plant or within the plant. Rooting medium should be sterile, free of bacteria and fungi. Fungi is a common culprit for death amongst cuttings. You can use potting medium or you can make your own with perliculite, cocoa coir, and vermiculite. So that's a great little mix you can make yourself. Some spring garden care. So while you're out there doing propagation in your garden in the springtime, you're going to want to cut your perennial flowers back, leaving about 8 to 24 inches of stem on your old flowered perennials. Spring is an important time to be mindful of our pollinators. At this time of year, stem nesting pollinators are finding stems to lay their larvae, which will then hatch the following year. So it's important to leave those stems if you can. So 8 to 12 inches of growth of the old stems should be left when you're cutting back your flowers from last year. It's also recommended to weed your garden beds in springtime before unwanted growth takes over your entire garden. Unwanted growth is best terminated early before it spreads, grows, and eventually seeds. A small problem now can become a much bigger problem in a very short amount of time. Definitely with preventing seeding of that unwanted growth. Spring is also the time of year to mulch your beds. Mulch applied to bare areas like garden beds actually keeps weed pressure down. Mulch can be an entire presentation in itself, and I hope our compost guy can talk a little bit more about that. But in general, you want 3 inches of depth around your plants. Mulch can be pretty pricey, so it's much better to put 3 inches around your plants than to spread mulch very thin. If you are short on mulch, you can always put a cover crop between those mulchings if you want your soil to be covered. Avoid covering the base of the plant. This can cause root rot. I see tree volcanoes all over Blacksburg, and it drives me insane. Please don't do that. The donut method is way better. So you want to keep mulch away from the roots of your plants, at least a couple inches. Or you can taper if you're looking for aesthetics. You can taper so it's super thin right next to the tree or your plant. So pro tip, it's great to mulch after rain because it keeps that moisture in also. And avoid artificially colored mulch. It might be aesthetically pleasing short term, but it's not serving any ecological purpose. And eventually those dyes just seep into our soil and into our environment. Healthy mulch will have a deep, rich color and smell if your mulch is healthy.
Does that cause a problem?
Mulch? I am not aware. Oh, sorry. So the question was, does mulch cause a problem with acidity? It's I've never heard of that, but I'm not 100% sure. I know that it's one of like the 4 major components of soil health. So you want to keep your soil covered. Because you don't want bare soil. It's not good for like the microbiome of the soil, and it loses a lot of moisture when you keep your soil exposed. But I'm not sure about the acidity. I've never heard anything related. So if you feel inspired to propagate, I want to talk about some upcoming propagation events. And I also want to mention that there's a garden outside. So after the presentation part, we can, those who want to participate will go outside and we can take some more cuttings of what's already in the garden. But back to upcoming events. I hope you feel inspired to do some propagating this spring and any time of year. But springtime is a great time for propagating, and we have several events coming up related to propagating. There are many grafting workshops that take place this time of year. I didn't touch on grafting because it's an entire different ball game and it does deserve its own presentation. So there are many upcoming, and if you want more details on that, you can certainly reach out and we can get you the information here. But here's just 3 in the next 2 weeks that are occurring right now. The New River Valley Master Gardener Association plant sale is coming up too in May. It's May 9th at the Montgomery County Government Center. That's where the Montgomery Extension Office is. So this plant sale funds many projects around the NRV, including this one that has allowed me to buy supplies for presentations that I do here. And one other thing I wanted to mention is there is a hands-on propagation workshop at the Live, Work, Eat, Grow Community Garden. It is at the Native Plant Nursery at the Hale Community Garden. It's going to be on April 3rd from 4 to 6. The rain date is the next day, so April 4th from 4 to 6. This is a really cool event. It's an educational workshop with the complete cycle of digging up native plants in the native garden that they have at the Hale Garden. It's a great garden. If you haven't gone, I would definitely recommend checking it out. So participants will go home with their own plant, native plant, and it'll be the complete cycle. So digging it up, separating the roots, repotting it, with other experts in the area. So yeah. Thank you. Any questions? Hale Garden? It should be on Bishop Road. It is in Blacksburg. The Hale Garden.
North Main.
North Main. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. No, yeah, the Bishop Road comes the other way. Yeah, 215 Maywood Street. Okay. Well, any questions? Anyone who wants to participate outside certainly can join me in the garden. Otherwise, please feel free to take some coreopsis or some cuttings of this plant that I have.
So as a little thank you, Sasha was here last fall, so already got one of our little upcycled tote bags. So we actually have a pick your own gift box.
Oh,
so you
nice.
can, sustainability related, there's some books, there's reusable straws, so you don't have to, I can put it over here so you can.
I did, these are the two books I used for my presentation today, definitely worth checking out. And then the Master Gardener Handbook is available on the internet. So these are the books I used for today's presentation for my research, and they're great books.
So rosemary is considered a woody plant to propagate before the new growth starts. Is that right?
Rosemary, I don't think it matters. I've taken rosemary cuttings at any time of year. As long as I would recommend doing like a 4-inch cutting and then removing the bottom weeds. And then I've done it directly in water and have never had a problem. But I take them at any time of year. I've never had an issue. Yeah.
Most people say you need to wait. But you don't do it.
Yes. Nice. I might have never bloomed either.
Yeah.
Can you keep them out?
Why?
Can you keep them outdoors somewhat protected?
I don't know. So.
They have sometimes, but they have also died. I keep mine in the pot.
They only feel 6 degrees.
Right, yeah. I had a couple warm years where mine.
All right. Well,
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
anyone who wants to go outside.
The
we'll go
Master
outside.
Gardeners and Cooperative Extension are an amazing resource. And I've been gardening for a long time and I learned several new things today. So really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.